This story is titled, Mom and Dad Declined to Babysit My Child for a Few Hours While I Graduated University. But days later, they took my golden brother's daughters to Disneyland, so I severed relations with them. They only found out next month when my regular payment didn't come, and now they're begging. Sup Reddit? Sorry for the wall of text, but I need to get this off my chest. English isn't my first language since my dad's Italian and my mom's American, so please bear with me. I'm using a throwaway account because my family knows my main one. I've been lurking on Reddit for years, reading stories about family drama, and never thinking I'd be posting my own saga here. Yet here I am, sharing what might be one of the most satisfying yet heartbreaking experiences of my life. It's taken me months to process everything that happened and come to terms with the decisions I made and the consequences that followed. Some nights I still lie awake wondering if I went too far, if there was another way to handle things. Other nights I sleep peacefully, knowing I protected someone who matters more to me than anyone else in this world. My son. This story isn't just about revenge, though there's definitely an element of that. It's about setting boundaries, recognizing toxic relationships, and ultimately choosing to break cycles of favoritism and emotional manipulation that have defined my family for generations. My name is Daniel, and I'm 34 years old. In my family's eyes, I'm what you'd call the disappointment. Not because I'm a failure, quite the opposite actually. I'm a mechanical engineer who owns a small but successful HVAC consulting firm. The disappointment comes from the simple fact that I'm not my younger brother Kevin, who's 31. I've spent my entire life living in the shadow of his supposed potential, watching my accomplishments be diminished and dismissed, while his smallest efforts were celebrated like Olympic victories. It wasn't always easy to recognize this pattern. When you grow up in a household with such blatant favoritism, you start to believe that maybe there really is something special about your sibling that you're missing. Maybe they possess some quality that makes them more deserving of love and attention. It took years of therapy after leaving home to understand that the problem wasn't me. It was the toxic family dynamic my parents had created and maintained throughout our childhood. Let me paint you a picture of my childhood through a series of moments that might seem small individually, but collectively formed the narrative of my place in the family hierarchy. When I was 9 years old, Kevin broke our mom's grandmother's china during one of his tantrums. This wasn't just any dishware. It was a family heirloom that had been carefully preserved for generations. Mom had always told us how precious it was, how it had survived the treacherous journey from Europe with her ancestors, passed down through multiple generations as one of the few tangible connections to our family's history. When Kevin sent it crashing to the floor in a moment of uncontrolled rage, our parents simply said, "Accidents happen." They immediately rushed to comfort him as he cried, telling him it was just old stuff anyway and that he shouldn't feel bad about it. Just 4 weeks later, I accidentally broke a regular dinner plate while drying dishes, a routine chore I did every night to help out around the house. The response was drastically different. My parents lectured me for nearly an hour about being more careful, about understanding the cost of things, and about taking responsibility for my actions. They made me do extra chores for weeks to pay back the cost of that ordinary dinner plate, while the priceless family heirloom Kevin destroyed was dismissed as meaningless. When I was 17, after months of late nights perfecting my project in our garage, I won the state science fair with an innovative air filtration system. The judges were genuinely impressed, saying it showed exceptional promise for real-world applications. My science teacher was so excited that she called my parents personally to tell them how proud they should be of what I had accomplished. The award ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m. on a Saturday, and my parents promised they would be there to watch me receive recognition for my hard work. But at 1 p.m. that day, they informed me they couldn't make it because Kevin had a basketball game. Not a championship game, not even a playoff game. Just a regular season game where he spent the entire time warming the bench as he had done for the entire season. I ended up accepting my award alone, watching other kids celebrate with their families while I stood off to the side, my certificate clutched in trembling hands, trying not to let my disappointment show. The pattern continued into my college years. When I was 19, I received a full-ride scholarship to one of the top engineering programs in the country. The acceptance letter arrived on a Thursday, and I couldn't wait to share the incredible news at dinner that evening. When I announced it, expecting at least some acknowledgement of this major achievement, Their response was lukewarm at best. "Well, engineering is a safe choice, I guess," my mother said with a shrug. "Kevin's so creative with his music," my father added, as if creativity was somehow more valuable than academic excellence. They spent the rest of that meal discussing Kevin's upcoming recital at the local coffee shop, while my scholarship, which would save them tens of thousands of dollars in tuition costs, was barely mentioned again. The financial relief this scholarship provided our family was substantial, but it seemed to matter less than Kevin's performance for an audience of maybe 15 people at a coffee shop open mic night. When I was 23, I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in mechanical engineering, already having job offers from 3 prestigious firms in the industry. My parents did attend the graduation ceremony, which I appreciated at the time, but they spent most of it on their phones texting Kevin about his band's setup for their gig that night. They left immediately after my name was called, not even staying for the reception where other families mingled and celebrated their graduates' achievements. They didn't meet my professors who had specifically asked to congratulate them on raising such a dedicated student, and they showed no interest in the opportunities that lay ahead for me. They were far more concerned about making it to the local bar where Kevin's band was playing to an audience of maybe 15 people. When I started my own company at 26, having saved every penny and worked 80-hour weeks at a larger firm to learn the business inside and out, my mother questioned my decision immediately. "Isn't it risky?" she asked with genuine concern. "Maybe you should just work for someone else, like Kevin does at the music store." Never mind that Kevin's job at the music store was part-time, paid minimum wage, and mainly allowed him to use the recording equipment after hours for his own projects. My comprehensive business plan, extensive market research, and the contracts I'd already secured meant nothing compared to Kevin's stability at a job he could barely maintain and showed little commitment to. Throughout all of this, Kevin remained the golden child who could do absolutely no wrong, despite his consistent track record of failure and complete dependency on our parents. He dropped out of college not once, not twice, but 3 times. First, he left the music program at State University because the professors just didn't understand his unique style. Then he dropped out of community college because the curriculum was too restrictive for his creativity. Finally, he abandoned an online program because it was taking time away from his band practice. Each time Kevin failed, my parents were there to console him, assuring him it wasn't his fault and that higher education just isn't for everyone. They funded each of these attempts fully, including buying him expensive new equipment that he claimed was absolutely necessary for his studies. He lived at home until he was 28 years old, occupying the largest bedroom in the house, which my parents renovated twice to accommodate his ever-expanding studio needs. The soundproofing alone cost them thousands of dollars. Despite being nearly 30, Kevin had approximately 0 life skills. He couldn't cook anything beyond microwave meals, never learned to do laundry properly, and had to call my dad whenever a light bulb needed changing. But apparently, the fact that he played guitar and was following his dreams made him infinitely better than me. The boring son who just built things for a living designed HVAC systems that thousands of people use daily, created jobs, and contributed tangibly to society. Growing up, I watched Kevin get everything handed to him on a silver platter, while I scraped by with the bare minimum. New guitar for Christmas? Of course, not just any guitar, but a $1,400 Fender that he had been eyeing for months. New amplifier for his birthday? Absolutely. A professional-grade setup that most hobby musicians could only dream of owning. A complete drum set to round out his sound, despite having absolutely no knowledge of percussion? Why not? Meanwhile, I worked at the local hardware store after school starting at age 17, putting in 25 hours a week while maintaining my 4.0 GPA, just to buy my own graphing calculator for AP classes. My parents said the $140 price tag was too expensive for something I'd only use for 1 year. I saved for months to buy a decent laptop for college, while Kevin was simply given a top-of-the-line MacBook for his music production needs. When I finally gathered the courage to point out this obvious disparity in how we were treated, sitting my parents down for what I hoped would be a serious conversation during my college sophomore year, the response was both predictable and infuriating. My mom patted my hand condescendingly and said, "But Daniel, you're so responsible. We don't need to worry about you like we do with Kevin." You've always been so self-sufficient." My father nodded in agreement, adding, "Kevin needs more support to find his way. You've always known your path." The translation was crystal clear. You're the workhorse, he's the show pony. You exist to pull the cart while he exists to be admired. Your purpose in this family is to achieve so we can afford to pay for his failures. Your stability isn't a virtue to be rewarded. It's an expectation to be exploited without question or gratitude. Fast forward to now, and I've managed to build a successful life despite my parents' complete lack of support, though not without experiencing some significant personal hardships along the way. I'm divorced after catching my ex-wife with her work colleague. Yeah, that old story that never gets less painful no matter how common it might be. I have joint custody of my amazing 7-year-old son Luke, who is absolutely my world, and my reason for pushing forward even on the darkest days. The divorce itself was ugly and expensive, emotionally draining in ways I couldn't have prepared for despite thinking I was ready for anything. But I fought with everything I had for 50-50 custody because Luke means everything to me. The divorce could honestly be its own entire post, a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person and rebuilding your life from the ashes of complete betrayal. I had been on a business trip to oversee a major project in Tampa, a 4-day visit that got cut short when the client signed the contract early. I was excited to surprise my wife with the good news and the substantial commission that would follow from landing such a significant deal. I caught an earlier flight home, still remembering the sinking feeling that developed in my stomach as I pulled into our driveway and saw an unfamiliar car parked there. Part of me knew instantly what I was about to discover, but another part tried desperately to rationalize the situation. Maybe it was just a friend visiting. Maybe she had called someone for company while I was away. I opened our front door quietly, hearing music playing upstairs. As I climbed the stairs, I heard laughter. Her laughter, but different somehow, more uninhibited than I'd heard in months. I found them in our bed, the bed we'd saved for months to buy when we first got married, the bed where Luke had been conceived. Her work colleague Jason, whom I'd met at company parties, and whom I'd even invited into our home for dinner just weeks before, was with my wife in the most intimate way possible. The scene that followed was both ridiculous and heartbreaking. Her shock at seeing me, his frantic scrambling for clothes, and my own eerie calm as I simply turned around and walked out without saying a word. I drove aimlessly for hours until I could think clearly enough to process what I'd witnessed. When I finally returned home, she was alone and crying, full of excuses about how I wasn't emotionally available and how she had needs that weren't being met. Classic justifications that did absolutely nothing to mend what had been irreparably broken between us. She tried to take me for everything during the divorce proceedings, a level of viciousness emerging that I'd never seen in our 9 years together. She claimed I was an absent father because I worked too much, conveniently forgetting that my work had provided the comfortable lifestyle she had grown accustomed to. The vacations she constantly posted about on Instagram, the private preschool Luke attended, and the financial security she enjoyed. Fortunately, the judge saw right through her accusations, especially when I showed up to court with 4 years of meticulously documented school events, soccer practices, doctor's appointments, and bedtime stories, all logged in both digital calendars and a physical journal I'd kept religiously. This habit of documentation was something I developed precisely because of my own childhood experiences of being overlooked and diminished. I was absolutely determined that Luke would never doubt his importance in my life or question whether he mattered to me. The evidence was overwhelming and painted a clear picture of my involvement as a father, but the legal battle still cost me $60,000 in attorney fees, depleting a significant portion of my savings and forcing me to take out a substantial loan against my business to cover the costs. It was financially devastating, but I would have paid twice that amount to ensure Luke remained a priority in my life. Meanwhile, Kevin finally got his act together at 28 years old when he married Jessica, a sweet girl who was honestly way too good for him. They now have twin 5-year-old boys together. Kevin works as a music coordinator at a local church, which basically means he plays guitar during Sunday services and runs the youth band. Hardly the challenging career that would justify years of financial support from our parents. My parents, Frank, who's 67, and Linda, who's 64, are both retired now. Dad worked as a middle manager at a paper company for most of his career, while mom had a part-time position as a receptionist at a dentist's office. They're constantly complaining about money and their financial struggles, but somehow they've managed to maintain their comfortable lifestyle throughout their retirement. Here's the real kicker in this whole situation. For the past 6 years, I've been sending them $900 every single month to help with their bills. I started this financial assistance when Dad retired because they claimed that Social Security wasn't enough to cover their basic expenses. Being the idiot I was who still believed in the concept of helping family, I didn't think twice about stepping up to support them. They sold me this elaborate sob story about how Dad's pension had been cut by the company, how Medicare didn't cover Mom's essential prescriptions, and how their house needed urgent repairs they simply couldn't afford on their fixed income. I fell for it completely, hook, line, and sinker. "Family helps family," Dad would say with conviction, though it's funny how that philosophy only seemed to flow in one direction. Last month, I enrolled in an executive MBA program specifically designed to help grow my business and expand my client base. The classes are scheduled on weekends, which works perfectly with my custody arrangement and allows me to spend weekdays focused on work and time with Luke. But then I received incredible news. I had been selected to present at a major industry conference, a huge opportunity that could potentially lead to contracts worth millions for my firm. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday at 3 p.m., and unfortunately, I had Luke with me that week. This wasn't just any conference. It was the International HVAC Innovation Summit, and getting selected to present there is like being personally invited to pitch directly to every major player in the industry. My topic was advanced energy efficiency in commercial climate systems. I know it sounds boring to most people, but landing contracts from this conference could set my company up financially for the next decade. My regular babysitter had a family emergency when her mother suffered a stroke, which was completely understandable, and I couldn't possibly ask her to prioritize my needs during such a difficult time. My backup sitter was sick with severe food poisoning. I called 4 different daycare centers in the area, but they were all at full capacity with waiting lists. I even briefly considered bringing Luke with me to the conference, but a 7-year-old at a professional industry presentation clearly wasn't going to work for anyone involved. All I needed was someone reliable to watch Luke from 1 o'clock to 5 p.m. Just 4 hours total. That's it. Nothing complicated, no overnight care, no extensive activities planned. Just someone to supervise him, give him lunch, and let him play with his Legos while I delivered what could be the most important presentation of my career. I called my parents, who lived just 30 minutes away in a nice suburban house that I later learned was mortgaged to the hilt. They're always posting on Facebook about being blessed grandparents and how family is everything. So I figured this would be a simple request that any loving grandparents would be happy to fulfill. When I called my mom and explained the situation in detail, asking if they could watch Luke for those few crucial hours, she immediately started making excuses about Thursday not being a good day for them. When I pressed her and asked if something was wrong or if they had a doctor's appointment or some other commitment, she mentioned that my father's back had been bothering him and that they were trying to rest more these days. I emphasized that it was literally just 4 hours, that I could drop Luke off and pick him up myself, and that he would be no trouble at all. He just needed lunch and someone to supervise him while he played with his Legos. She refused outright, suggesting that I ask Kevin instead. When I reminded her that Kevin works on Thursdays and wouldn't be available, she simply said, "Well, I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." That last line, "You always do," was essentially the story of my entire life. Good old reliable Daniel will figure it out because he always does. Daniel doesn't need help or support because he's so capable and self-sufficient. I had to cancel the presentation, losing what could have been a career-defining opportunity. The company ended up going with another firm for their projects. My business partner later heard through industry connections that our competitor had landed contracts worth $3.2 million from that single presentation I missed. Just 5 days later, I was having lunch with a client who was excitedly showing me pictures from their recent family vacation to Universal Studios. As he was scrolling through the photos on his phone, I saw something that made me literally choke on my sandwich. There, in the background of one of his vacation photos, were my parents at Universal Studios with Kevin's twin boys. The client thought I was having some kind of allergic reaction as I struggled to catch my breath. I asked him to scroll back to that photo, and there they were, clear as day, wearing Harry Potter merchandise and grinning like absolute idiots, obviously having the time of their lives. I immediately checked Instagram when I got home, and sure enough, Jessica had posted an entire album titled Magical Week at Universal with the best grandparents ever. Thanks Frank and Linda for making this happen. 8 days. They had spent 8 full days at Universal Studios with Kevin's children, but they couldn't spare 4 hours to watch my son so I could advance my career. The photos showed them at elaborate character breakfasts, on private VIP tours that cost hundreds of dollars, wearing matching Universal merchandise, having expensive dinners at themed restaurants, using express passes for every attraction, and staying in a luxury suite at the Hard Rock Hotel. I counted the pictures, 263 photos across multiple posts documenting their magical week together. You know how many pictures my parents have with Luke on their social media accounts? 14 total, ever, in his entire 7 years of life. I sat down and did the math on their Universal trip. Based on the hotel, the VIP tours, the express passes, the character meals, and all the merchandise I saw in the photos, this vacation cost them at least $18,000. But the worst part was in one of Jessica's video posts where I could hear my mother's voice saying, "We've been planning this for months. The boys deserve such a special treat." They had been planning this elaborate vacation for months, while I had been coordinating schedules for weeks, specifically making sure they knew when I might need their help with Luke. I called my mom immediately, skipping any pleasantries or small talk. I mentioned seeing their Universal Studios trip in my client's photos. After a long, uncomfortable pause, she admitted that she was going to tell me about it eventually. I confronted her directly about spending an entire week at an expensive theme park with Kevin's children while being completely unable to watch Luke for just 4 hours. She dismissed my concerns as being dramatic, explaining that Kevin's boys had been having a hard time adjusting to kindergarten and that she and Dad wanted to do something really special for them. When I asked her to tell me the last time they had done something special with Luke, she claimed they see him regularly. I challenged her to name one specific time in the past 8 months that they had spent quality time with my son. She could only mention Christmas, when they stopped by our house for 30 minutes to drop off a $15 toy for Luke while bringing Kevin's kids elaborate gaming systems that cost hundreds of dollars each. As our conversation escalated and became more heated, she insisted that they loved all their grandchildren equally and that I was making something out of nothing. That's when I dropped the bombshell. I informed her that the $900 I had been sending them every single month would stop immediately. The reaction was swift and telling. She was absolutely outraged, saying they depended on that money to survive and pay their basic bills. When I pointed out that they seemed to have plenty of money for elaborate Universal Studios vacations, she insisted that was completely different, that Kevin and his family needed this special trip. I simply said that I had needed 4 hours of help from my own parents, and I ended the call abruptly. I immediately blocked both of their phone numbers, feeling a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in years. The first week after our confrontation brought beautiful, peaceful silence. I actually slept better than I had in years, no longer carrying the weight of their constant emotional manipulation and financial demands. During the second week, Kevin began texting me frantically, clearly panicked about what was happening with our parents. "Frank and Linda are freaking out. What did you do?" he wrote. He sent a dozen more increasingly desperate text messages, mentioning that they couldn't pay their mortgage and that my mother was crying constantly. I ignored every single message, thinking that if this was destroying them emotionally and financially, then good. They deserved every bit of anxiety they were experiencing. By the third week, extended family members started reaching out to me, clearly having been contacted by my parents, who were apparently telling everyone that I had abandoned them for absolutely no reason. I didn't respond to any of these messages yet because I was methodically gathering ammunition for what I knew would be an inevitable confrontation. My cousin Jennifer texted that my mom had called her mother crying, claiming that I had cut them off completely out of nowhere without any explanation. My aunt emailed saying that this behavior wasn't like me and that my parents were worried sick about our relationship. My uncle left a voicemail asking me to call him because my folks were apparently in really bad emotional shape. I documented every single message, call, and text message I received, building my case methodically and preparing for the moment when I would reveal the full truth about their financial situation and lies. In the fourth week, I received a call from an unknown number. It was my father, who said we desperately needed to talk about the money situation. He revealed that my mother was having severe panic attacks and that they genuinely couldn't pay their bills without my monthly support. When I questioned how they could afford an expensive Universal Studios vacation but couldn't handle their basic monthly expenses, he claimed it was a special occasion and a one-time expenditure that they had saved up for. I told him that I had taken the time to look at my mother's Facebook account more carefully, and I had seen evidence of multiple cruises, weekend getaways, and expensive new furniture purchases over the past year. A lot of supposed one-time things that painted a very different picture of their financial situation. When he insisted that they were my parents and that I couldn't just abandon them like this, I simply replied, "Watch me," and hung up the phone. Being analytical by nature, engineer, remember, I decided to do some serious digging into their actual financial situation. What I discovered was absolutely illuminating and confirmed every suspicion I had developed. I hired a private investigator, which may sound extreme to some people, but I needed concrete evidence and the complete truth about where their money was really going. What the investigator found was a gold mine of financial irresponsibility and outright deception. My parents had refinanced their house 4 separate times in the last 12 years, pulling out equity each time to fund their lifestyle. They had accumulated $180,000 in credit card debt across multiple accounts. They were leasing 2 luxury vehicles, a BMW for my father and a Mercedes for my mother, with monthly payments that were astronomical for people on supposedly fixed incomes. They maintained an expensive country club membership that cost them $600 every month, despite claiming they couldn't afford basic necessities. My mother had developed a serious shopping addiction, spending an average of $2,500 monthly on clothes, jewelry, and home decor items she didn't need. My father's golf habit was costing them approximately $500 monthly just in green fees, not including equipment and the clubhouse bar tabs. But here's the real kicker that made my blood boil. They had also been giving Kevin approximately $1,200 every month to help with expenses for the twins, while telling me they were barely scraping by and desperately needed my financial support to survive. The most damaging discovery was that they had been telling completely different stories to different people throughout our extended family and social circle in order to extract money from them. They told my aunt that they desperately needed help with overwhelming medical bills that insurance wouldn't cover. They told my uncle that their roof was leaking severely and they couldn't afford the emergency repairs. They told their church friends that they were struggling to pay basic utility bills and might have their power shut off. They told their neighbors that they were financially supporting a sick relative who needed expensive treatments. They had been running an elaborate con game on our entire family and social network, and I had been their biggest mark, sending them more money monthly than anyone else while believing their sob stories about financial hardship. My parents decided to call a family meeting at my aunt's house to address the situation. They didn't bother to invite me, but my cousin was kind enough to text me about what was happening. They were apparently trying to get our relatives to pressure me into giving them money again, painting me as a cruel son who had abandoned his elderly parents in their time of need. I decided to crash this family meeting with receipts, literally. I walked into my aunt's house with a briefcase full of documents, and the room immediately went silent. My mother started crying the moment she saw me, deploying her go-to emotional manipulation tactic that had worked so effectively throughout my childhood. I announced to the assembled family members that since they were all discussing my supposed cruelty and lack of compassion, I thought it would be appropriate to share some actual facts about the situation. I had brought bank statements clearly showing my monthly payments to my parents over the past 6 years. I had screenshots and printed photos from their Universal Studios trip. I had copies of their credit card statements that the private investigator had obtained. I had public records from a court filing I had discovered during my research. I had created a detailed spreadsheet showing exactly where their money had actually been going. I had photos documenting their various expensive vacations over the past year. And I had a carefully sanitized version of the private investigator's comprehensive report. I laid everything out systematically on my aunt's dining room table like I was presenting a case in court, which in many ways I was. I explained to the shocked family members that for 6 years, I had faithfully given my parents $900 every single month, totaling $64,800 in financial support. During that exact same time period, they had spent over $240,000 on vacations, luxury purchases, and constantly bailing out Kevin whenever he needed money. Yet when I desperately needed them to watch my son for just 4 hours so I could deliver the most important presentation of my career, they claimed they were too tired and suggested I figure it out myself, as I always do. My aunt, who is my father's sister, went completely pale and asked in a shaking voice if this information was actually true. My dad couldn't even look at her directly, and his silence was absolutely damning. I continued my presentation, explaining that they had told me repeatedly that they were struggling financially and barely getting by on their Social Security and pensions, while simultaneously living like they had won the lottery. My uncle suddenly stood up, his face turning red with anger, and revealed that he had given them $6,000 the previous year because they claimed they might lose their house to foreclosure. My aunt then admitted that she had given them $4,000 for my mother's supposed emergency surgery that insurance allegedly wouldn't cover. Another cousin spoke up and admitted to lending them $2,500 for what they said were urgent car repairs that they couldn't afford. The room erupted as years of carefully constructed lies unraveled in real time, and family members realized they had all been systematically deceived and manipulated. My mother tried desperately to play the victim, sobbing dramatically about how nobody understood the financial pressure they had been under and how difficult it was to manage on a fixed income. Meanwhile, my father just sat there looking completely defeated, unable to offer any defense for their elaborate deception. Kevin, who had been silent throughout this entire revelation, finally spoke up and asked if it was really true that the money he thought our parents were giving him from their retirement savings had actually been coming from me all along. The look of dawning realization and horror on his face when he understood that he had been an unwitting accomplice in their scheme was absolutely priceless. 2 weeks after the explosive family meeting, I was served legal papers at my office. My parents were actually suing me for what they claimed was financial abandonment and breach of verbal contract. Their legal argument was that because I had been giving them money consistently for 6 years, I had created a legal dependency and couldn't simply stop providing support without proper notice. Their lawyer was some ambulance chaser who had probably taken the case for a percentage of any potential settlement, clearly seeing dollar signs. I hired the best contract attorney in the state to handle this ridiculous lawsuit. When he reviewed their filing, he literally laughed out loud, calling it the legal equivalent of a toddler's tantrum. We immediately filed a countersuit for fraud, since they had been systematically lying to people about my lack of financial support in order to extract money from other relatives, and we also sued them for harassment. But then they escalated things even further by trying to sue for grandparents' rights to see Luke. The problem with their strategy was that in our state, grandparents' rights only apply when there's an established, ongoing relationship with the child that's being unfairly interrupted. Thanks to their own years of neglect and indifference toward Luke, they had absolutely no legal case whatsoever. The judge seemed genuinely annoyed with their lawyer during the hearing, specifically questioning how they could possibly want visitation rights for a grandchild they couldn't even babysit for 4 hours when his father needed help. Their attorney tried desperately to argue that I was deliberately alienating them from Luke and preventing a relationship from developing. My lawyer came prepared with 4 years' worth of text messages where I had repeatedly invited them to Luke's school events, soccer games, and birthday parties, all of which were either declined or completely ignored. We provided school records clearly showing they had never attended a single function or event in Luke's educational career. We presented character statements from Luke's teachers and coaches saying they had never even met his paternal grandparents. And we included a detailed log showing they had spent less than 12 hours total with Luke in the entire previous year. My mother, being the social media-obsessed boomer that she is, decided to take the fight to Facebook and wage a public relations campaign against me. She started posting dramatic status updates about how her ungrateful son had heartlessly abandoned his family and how they were now struggling to survive in their golden years. Her posts included manipulative statements like, "When you give your child everything and they abandon you when you need them most," and praying for my son to find his way back to God and family, and some people forget where they came from. We're heartbroken, but we still love our misguided son. Rather than engaging directly with her social media drama, I decided to take a different approach. I created a simple, professional-looking website called therialstoryofranklinda.com, obviously not their real names. On this site, I posted every single receipt, screenshot, and financial document I had gathered during my investigation. I included a comprehensive timeline showing every instance where they chose Kevin's children over Luke, every expensive vacation they took while claiming poverty, every relative they had scammed with sob stories, and every lie they had told to manipulate people. I designed the website to look like a legitimate news site with a clean, professional layout. I presented just the facts with no emotional commentary, pure documentation of their behavior and financial irresponsibility. Then, I shared the link as a comment on each of her Facebook posts, letting people draw their own conclusions from the evidence. The reaction from their social circle was swift and devastating. Their friends started asking pointed questions about the discrepancies between her posts and the documented evidence. Relatives who had been sympathetic began demanding explanations and apologies. Their church, where Kevin works as the music coordinator, started distancing themselves from the family. The comments on her posts went from supportive messages like, "Praying for you during this difficult time," to confused questions like, "Is this information true, Linda?" to angry accusations like, "I can't believe you lied to us about everything." The lawsuits were dismissed quickly and decisively, exactly as my attorney had predicted. But the legal fees completely bankrupted my parents, since spending all your money on luxury vacations and country club memberships doesn't leave much available for competent legal representation. The family meeting had opened everyone's eyes to their deceptive practices, and my aunt and uncle demanded their money back immediately. When my parents couldn't repay what they owed, my relatives followed through on their threats and sued them as well. Kevin tried desperately to intervene at this point, calling me repeatedly and begging me to help our parents before they lost everything. He kept insisting that regardless of what they had done, they were still our parents and deserved our support. When I asked him whether they had been acting like parents when they chose to watch his kids for an entire week but couldn't spare 4 hours for mine, he claimed that situation was somehow different. When I pressed him to explain exactly how it was different, he insisted that his children had needed that special Universal Studios trip for their emotional well-being. I informed him that I had desperately needed to deliver that presentation, which ultimately cost me millions of dollars in potential contracts for my business. Kevin was genuinely shocked by this revelation, having been told by our parents that I was simply being dramatic about some little work thing. He had no idea about the significance of the conference or the devastating financial opportunity I had lost because of their selfishness. Kevin admitted that his wife Jessica had been saying for months that something seemed really off about the money they were receiving from our parents, noting that the amounts didn't add up with them supposedly being on a fixed retirement income. That's when the final piece of the puzzle clicked for him, and he realized the full extent of what had been happening. The entire house of cards collapsed incredibly quickly after that. The bank moved forward with foreclosure proceedings on their house due to missed mortgage payments. Both of their luxury cars were repossessed by the leasing companies. The country club not only banned them from the premises, but also sued them for thousands of dollars in unpaid dues and fees. Their credit cards were all maxed out and subsequently canceled, leaving them with no available credit. They had no choice but to declare bankruptcy, which became a matter of public record that further humiliated them in their social circle. But the most satisfying part of this entire saga was what happened during that explosive family meeting. Jessica discovered that Kevin had been receiving regular financial support from our parents instead of working additional hours to support his own family. She was absolutely furious that they had been struggling to pay their own bills and make ends meet, while Kevin was essentially taking money that was originally coming from me rather than earning it himself through his own efforts. Jessica gave Kevin an ultimatum that was both clear and non-negotiable. Either he completely cuts off all contact and financial ties with our parents, or she would file for divorce and take the twins with her. Kevin, faced with losing his wife and children, chose his marriage and his own family's stability over maintaining a relationship with our manipulative parents. In one fell swoop, my parents managed to lose both of their sons. Their golden child, Kevin, finally saw them for exactly what they were: manipulative, selfish people who had been using everyone around them for their own benefit. Last month, almost a full year after the initial confrontation, and several months after the legal and social media battles had largely subsided, my phone displayed an incoming call from a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would let unknown calls go straight to voicemail because of the constant spam calls these days. But something, perhaps a lingering vigilance about my parents finding new ways to reach me, made me decide to answer. "Hello," I said cautiously, half expecting to hear a robotic voice offering to extend my car warranty or refinance my mortgage. "Daniel, son, please!" came a voice that was ragged and diminished, but unmistakably my father's. He sounded much older than his 67 years, his characteristic confidence completely replaced by something I had never heard from him before: genuine, desperate fear. I felt a complex surge of conflicting emotions washing over me. There was anger still simmering beneath the surface, a reflexive concern that had been conditioned into me over decades of being the responsible son, and a strange emptiness where familial love should have naturally resided. "Who is this?" I asked, even though I knew perfectly well who was calling. I wanted to force him to identify himself, to acknowledge that he was now essentially a stranger who needed to introduce himself rather than someone who could assume an automatic connection and immediate recognition. "Don't play games with me," he said, a hint of his old impatience and entitlement breaking through the veneer of desperate supplication. We're living in our car." The admission seemed to cause him physical pain, each word dragged reluctantly from his throat like he was confessing to a crime. "That sounds really uncomfortable," I replied, keeping my voice deliberately neutral, neither sympathetic nor mocking, just stating an obvious fact the same way he had stated facts about my insufficiencies and shortcomings throughout my entire childhood. There was a long pause filled only with his labored breathing and what sounded like traffic in the background. When he spoke again, the desperation had returned full force, his pride momentarily subsumed by absolute necessity. "We need help. Just enough money to get a small apartment. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just enough so we're not living on the street like homeless people." "I thought you had plenty of money," I said, unable to resist twisting the knife just slightly. "That's what you told everyone on Facebook, that I was exaggerating your financial troubles to justify abandoning you in your time of need." There was another pause, longer this time, filled with uncomfortable silence and the weight of his inability to respond to my accusation. When he finally spoke again, his voice was even smaller than before. We made mistakes, and we're sorry." The apology sounded painfully rehearsed, like a line he had practiced but didn't truly understand. He was sorry they got caught, sorry their elaborate schemes had collapsed around them, sorry they were now facing real consequences for their actions, but definitely not sorry for the years of emotional manipulation, financial exploitation, and blatant disregard for Luke's feelings. "Are you sorry, or are you sorry you got caught?" I asked directly, voicing the thought that was running through my mind. The silence that followed my question was absolutely damning in its length and obvious discomfort. Finally, I decided to cut straight to the heart of the matter and ask the question that really mattered to me. "Let me ask you something, Dad. If you hadn't gotten caught with all your lies, if I had kept sending you money every month like a fool, if everyone in the family hadn't learned the truth about your financial deception, would you have ever spent meaningful time with Luke? Would you have ever treated him the way you treat Kevin's kids?" "Of course we would have," he responded far too quickly, the answer hollow and automatic in its defensiveness. When I pressed him further, refusing to let him off the hook with vague assurances and empty promises, I asked, "You had 6 full years of his life, Dad. 6 years of birthdays and Christmases and soccer games and school events and opportunities to be involved grandparents. When exactly were you planning to start being real grandparents to him?" We were going to," he stammered pathetically, completely unable to complete the lie convincingly. We both knew the absolute truth, and there was no point in pretending otherwise. They had never intended to invest in a meaningful relationship with Luke. He was nothing more than collateral damage in their ongoing campaign to elevate Kevin's family while systematically extracting financial resources from me. "No, you weren't," I said quietly but firmly. "You know what? I'll help you exactly as much as you helped me when I desperately needed you. I'll give you exactly what you gave Luke when he wanted grandparents who actually cared about him. Nothing. I heard some rustling and movement on the line, and then my mother's voice replaced my father's, shrill with characteristic indignation and outrage. "You're actually going to let us be homeless?" she demanded, her voice rising to that familiar pitch I remembered from childhood. The digital equivalent of her screaming at me whenever I failed to live up to her impossible and constantly shifting expectations. "You let my son feel completely worthless," I replied calmly, my voice remaining level and controlled, despite the intense emotion rising in my chest. "You made him think he didn't deserve grandparents who cared about him or wanted to spend time with him. Tell me honestly, which situation is actually worse?" "He's just a child!" she shrieked, abandoning any pretense of rational discussion or reasonable conversation. "You're absolutely right," I agreed, surprising her into momentary silence with my unexpected response. "He is just a child. He doesn't understand why his grandparents don't love him or want to be around him. He doesn't understand why they could spend an entire week at Universal Studios with his cousins, but couldn't watch him for 4 hours so his dad could advance his career and provide better for their family. He doesn't understand why Christmas at your house means expensive gifts and constant attention for Kevin's kids while he gets an afterthought $15 toy. Do you want me to explain it to him? Do you want me to tell him it's because he's not Kevin's kid, and in this family, that's apparently all that matters?" "That's not true," she protested weakly, her voice suddenly much smaller and less certain. "Love is action, Mom. Love is showing up when people need you. Love is making someone a priority in your life. You and Dad have never, not once, done any of that for Luke or for me," I said with a deep sigh, suddenly feeling completely exhausted by this circular conversation and by decades of the same toxic patterns playing out again and again. "I have to go now. Luke is waiting for me to help him with his science project, and unlike some people in his life, I actually keep my promises to him." I hung up the phone without waiting for her response, not interested in hearing whatever manipulative guilt trip she was preparing to launch. My hands were shaking slightly as I set the phone down on my desk, adrenaline coursing through my system from the intensity of the confrontation. But beneath the physical reaction was a surprising sense of calm and closure that I hadn't expected to feel. I had said everything that needed to be said, clearly and without the emotional outburst that had characterized our interactions in the past. I had maintained my boundaries firmly without unnecessary cruelty, but also without wavering or showing any sign of weakness. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment to center myself and process what had just happened, and then went to join my son in the living room where he was arranging materials for his volcano project. His face absolutely lit up as I entered the room, his genuine excitement and joy a stark contrast to the toxic conversation I had just endured. "Dad, I think I figured out how to make the lava look more realistic," he exclaimed enthusiastically, holding up a bottle of dish soap that he had mixed with red food coloring. "That's awesome, buddy," I said with genuine pride, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside him. "Show me what you've got so far." As he enthusiastically explained his design modifications and creative improvements to the basic volcano model, I felt the tension and negativity from the phone call melting away completely. It was replaced by the simple, pure joy of being present with someone who truly mattered, someone who was genuinely worth showing up for. This, I thought to myself, is exactly what family should feel like. 7 months have passed since that final confrontation with my parents, and the consequences of their actions have continued to unfold. My parents now live in a cramped studio apartment in the worst part of town, a dramatic fall from their previous suburban lifestyle. My mother works at Walmart as a part-time cashier, and my father has taken a job delivering newspapers in the early morning hours. They're both in their 60s, essentially starting their lives over from scratch with no savings, no credit, and no support system. None of our extended family talks to them anymore. The relatives they scammed have made it clear that they want nothing to do with people who would lie and manipulate their own family members for money. Their former friends have distanced themselves completely after learning about their deceptive behavior. Even their social circle from the country club has abandoned them, unwilling to associate with people who turned out to be financial fraudsters. Kevin remains married, but just barely. Jessica's ultimatum forced him to make a choice between his toxic parents and his own family's well-being, and he chose correctly. Jessica made him get a second job to make up for the money he had been receiving from our parents, and they're currently in intensive marriage counseling to repair the damage caused by his family's manipulation. He hasn't spoken to our parents since Jessica discovered the truth about where their extra money had really been coming from. Meanwhile, Luke and I are absolutely thriving in our new life. My business has grown by 45% this year, partly because I can now focus entirely on work and family without the constant drain of my parents' financial demands and emotional manipulation. Luke is doing exceptionally well in school, both academically and socially, and our relationship has never been stronger. He asked about his paternal grandparents once, probably noticing that other kids talked about spending time with their grandparents while he never seemed to see his. I explained to him in age-appropriate terms that sometimes people make choices that hurt others, and when that happens, we have to protect ourselves by staying away from them. He thought about this explanation seriously for a moment, and then said, "Like how I don't play with Billy anymore because he always breaks my toys and never says sorry?" I confirmed that it was exactly like that situation, and he seemed completely satisfied with this explanation. Children have an innate sense of fairness, and Luke understood intuitively that people who consistently hurt you don't deserve continued access to your life. Last week, I ran into my aunt at the grocery store while shopping for Luke's lunch supplies. She told me that my parents had recently reached out to her, asking for money yet again. She said she literally laughed in their faces when they made their request. They called me dramatic and unreasonable when I warned them about their reckless spending habits, she said with obvious satisfaction. Now they want my help? Not a chance in hell. The extended family has completely and permanently cut them off from any financial support. Their former friends want absolutely nothing to do with them after learning about their years of deception. Their church told Kevin that Frank and Linda are no longer welcome at any events or gatherings. Apparently, they had tried to guilt various church members into giving them money by telling sob stories about their financial struggles, which backfired spectacularly when people learned the truth about their situation. They are now complete social pariahs, entirely alone and isolated from everyone they once considered friends or family. And honestly, I sleep like a baby every single night, knowing that I finally broke free from their toxic influence and protected my son from experiencing the same emotional damage I endured throughout my childhood. The final update. Yesterday, I received another call from an unknown number while I was at my office reviewing blueprints for a new municipal project that could significantly expand my business. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was just another sales call or robocall, but something told me I should pick up the phone. It was a social worker from the county's Department of Human Services. Her voice was professional, but kind, as she explained that Frank and Linda Williams had applied for emergency housing assistance through the county program. They had listed me, Daniel Williams, as a relative who might be able to provide financial support or housing. The social worker was simply doing her due diligence by exploring all possible options before proceeding with their application for government assistance. There was a time, perhaps a year ago, when such a call would have sent me into a devastating spiral of conflicting emotions. I would have felt anger at their continued audacity, guilt about their desperate predicament, and anxiety about what others would think if I refused to help my own parents. But as I sat there in my quiet office, surrounded by tangible evidence of the successful life I had built entirely through my own efforts and determination, I felt an unexpected and profound sense of peace. "I'm not able to assist them," I said simply, my voice steady and completely free of doubt or hesitation. "May I ask why?" the social worker inquired with no judgment in her tone. She was just gathering information for her official file and documentation. I took a moment to carefully consider my response, wanting to be truthful and accurate without unloading years of complex family history onto this woman who was simply doing her job professionally. "They chose not to be part of my son's life when we needed them most," I finally said. "They made their priorities very clear through their actions over many years. I'm simply respecting the boundaries they established through their own behavior." There was a brief pause during which I could hear her typing notes into her computer system. "I understand completely," she said with genuine empathy. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Williams." That was it. No drama, no emotional manipulation tactics, no guilt trips or attempts to make me feel bad about my decision. Just a simple, straightforward question and an equally simple, honest answer. After we hung up, I sat at my desk for several minutes, waiting for the familiar rush of complicated feelings that usually followed any interaction related to my parents. But that emotional turmoil never came. I felt absolutely nothing. Not satisfaction at their downfall, not guilt about their circumstances, not anger about their continued attempts to use me as a resource, and not even relief at having successfully maintained my boundaries. Nothing at all. They have become just strangers now who happen to share my DNA. People whose connection to me is nothing more than a biological accident rather than any kind of meaningful bond built on love, respect, or mutual care. I returned to my blueprints, made a mental note to pick up Luke's favorite ice cream on the way home from work, and continued with my day exactly as I would have if that call had never happened. My parents are now completely on their own, facing the consequences of decades of poor choices, financial irresponsibility, and emotional manipulation. They burned every bridge they had with family and friends through their own selfish actions. Kevin has chosen his wife and children over maintaining a relationship with people who nearly destroyed his marriage through their lies and manipulation. As for Luke and me, we're building something beautiful together, a relationship based on trust, honesty, and genuine care for each other's well-being. He'll grow up knowing that his father always shows up for him, always keeps his promises, and always puts his needs first. He'll never have to wonder if he's loved or valued, and he'll never experience the kind of emotional neglect and favoritism that defined my own childhood. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect the people who matter most from those who would harm them, even if those harmful people happen to be family. I sleep peacefully every night knowing that I broke a generational cycle of toxicity and gave my son the stable, loving environment he deserves. TLDR. After years of financial and emotional manipulation by my parents, who clearly favored my brother's family over my son and me, I cut them off completely when they refused to babysit for 4 hours, but spent $18K on a week-long vacation with my brother's kids. Their lies unraveled, the whole family disowned them, and they're now homeless while my son and I are thriving. No regrets whatsoever.